Okay, welcome to Making Music. Today we're going to talk about how to choose an acoustic guitar. And the ones that we just played are some very high-end instruments. Jack was playing a Martin, which one was that?
That'd be the D41 Special.
D41 Special.
Pre-war design.
Okay, and I was playing a Gibson SJ200, which is also a very high-end guitar. We kind of like to do that, but what we're here today to talk about is not necessarily what a guitar costs, but how you choose one, what it sounds like, and how you go about picking one out, whether it be a gift for someone, whether you buy it for yourself, or whether you just find one that a friend gives you or loans you or whatever. Let's talk about history just for a second. First of all, let's dispel some myths, okay? Because that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that the guitar was invented by a left-handed person so that your dexterity was on your left hand up here on the fingerboard. Now, I am a left-handed person, and I'm not a great guitar player, but I do play with my left hand up on the fingerboard, which is considered a right-hand position. A left-hand position would be considered this way, which would put my right hand on the fingerboard, my left hand down here, and I can't play the guitar that way. Neither can you. So, regardless of whether you're left-handed, if you haven't already started out playing guitar, we always recommend that you play it in what's considered the normal right-handed position. For those of you that are left-handed, it gives you an advantage. It was actually invented by a left-handed man. Maybe a woman, I'm not sure. It was called a lute or something. By the way, went back to the Baroque musical period, 1600s to 1780, give or take, right in there, that period. And the guitar started out very small, probably a lot like that one right behind you, Jack, that's size. And size of a guitar is another thing that we'd like to talk about. Now, that is probably between a half and a three-quarter size guitar. And I'd like to dispel another myth. You'll notice that that has nylon strings. Oftentimes, people say that you have to use a nylon string guitar to start out, that it's easier on little fingers and that it's easier to play. Actually, it's not. The nylon string guitar has a wider neck than a steel string guitar and typically is harder on little hands and little fingers. Here's a full-size nylon string guitar. Now if you'll look at the difference in necks, we can shoot those two. You see the width here between these two necks, and it's an amazing thing to see what the difference is between the playability between these, the width of the neck across here and across here. It's much easier for little hands to play a narrower neck and therefore a steel string guitar. Now yes, there are some finger problems as far as little calluses and that sort of thing go, but we always have to develop calluses on the tips of our fingers. It's not a bad thing. You ladies don't have a problem. It's just tiny little calluses. It's not like you're going to be looking like a, bricklayer or something. Well, you play too much, Jack. So basically, you don't have to have a nylon string guitar unless you want to play classical music. Okay, now play the same thing on a steel string guitar, please. We'll show you the difference here and how they sound. Okay, a steel string guitar like Jack is playing is basically used for country, folk, rock, blues,
jazz,
everything but classical. Doesn't matter, that it happens to be a steel string guitar. Oftentimes it's called a folk guitar, but that's not all that we do with it. So typically, if I were to choose for anyone that was a normal adult-sized human being, I would take a full-size, what we call a dreadnought guitar. Can we take a look at some of the, let's look at that pink one. Let's look at, yeah, now that, pink is in this year, by the way. If you haven't been to the malls lately, let me tell you, pink is in. And not to be outdone, we've got a pink guitar. And this is a starter guitar. It comes in a little package with a gig bag and some accessories and that sort of thing, and I think they sell for a couple $100. It's not an expensive guitar, but it sounds reasonably good. It will tune reasonably well, and comes in a variety of colors. You can get it in pink, blue, black, natural, that sort of thing. And
now, One thing I'd like to point out about this particular instrument, because I want to go to the next one up, this one has what they call a laminated top or non-solid top. And you hear a lot of people talking about solid top versus laminate, or if they're really trying to put it down, they'll call it plywood.
Right.
And there is a difference between the two. But let me grab the solid top instrument from the same luthier, because it's also important when you're comparing woods, and we'll talk about this more, to compare the same luthier, because if you get an excellent craftsman with the crappiest wood, you can get a great guitar. And if you take the best Brazilian rosewood with somebody like myself building it, you get nothing. But you hear how much fuller this guitar is with the solid top. Okay. So apples to apples,
yeah, it's
solid versus laminate, you'll get a better sounding guitar from the same manufacturer.
From the manufacturer. Another thing I'd like to point out is that wood is like snowflakes, really. There are no two pieces alike. So even though you have the same exact model from a high-end manufacturer like Fender or Gibson or Martin or Taylor, whomever, the same guitar, same model, same everything, even the same species, i.e. maple or rosewood, is not going to sound the same. You have to play them. You have to actually play the guitars. And
that's a good thing, actually.
It is a good thing, because that's half the fun. I mean, you know, it's like test driving cars. You want to drive about 200 of them before you spend your $50,000 today. So with guitars, it's not that big a thing. Now, guitars are gaining popularity in our schools today. There's a couple of reasons for that, several reasons actually. One of them is that a guitar is very inexpensive relative to other instruments. It costs much less than a flute or a saxophone or a trumpet or a clarinet. I mean, you know.
When I started playing music, my first choice was a drum set. My parents looked at what a starter drum set would go, and they go, "You're playing a ukulele."
Well, that's it. Yeah, ukuleles are very inexpensive, and by the way, coming back, becoming very popular right now. So a guitar actually can be adapted to any style of music, and it's also a soloist instrument as well as a combo instrument. It can be played in an ensemble or a band, and very easily taken on the road, and the singer-songwriter tool of choice. If you're going to sit down and you're going to write a tune and pick it up and stay up till midnight or whatever, then a guitar is usually the choice, although some people use keyboards. Now, let's talk about some other kinds of guitars here. In acoustic guitars, there's the round back. This is kind of interesting. This is made by Ovation, and this back material started out way back in the Vietnam War era when Kaman Aerospace made these guitars. Bill Kaman played with Glenn Miller, and he was using this when helicopter blades were just brand new, you know, sort of a composite material. And he had, when they switched to this composite, he thought, well, we can use this for the guitar body, and we can use all that spruce that we have left over for the guitar necks. And so they took the old helicopter blades, cut them down into necks, and the Ovation was born. But this guitar is kind of a cool guitar too. It has its own kind of a tone. It can be very delicate, or it can be, you know, pretty harsh.
The reason we should talk a little bit about the physics of the guitar, what the back and sides of the guitar do, is the sound is generated from the top, which is why people like a solid piece, because it resonates better compared to a laminate top. Mm-hmm. But the back and sides are supposed to be rigid, so the sound goes into the guitar and is directed out the sound hole. So what Kaman was doing with their fiberglass or their composite backs was to get a very rigid sound surface, and that allowed the guitars to really project well in performance. And so they were very popular with performing artists when they first came out.
Absolutely. And that does sound good. Now this guitar is made by Taylor. Very beautiful instrument. See, the wood is not only aesthetic, but it has a lot to do with the tonal qualities as well. Now, this looks like a maple back and side guitar.
That's right. And
with a solid spruce top, and it's just beautiful, beautiful guitar. It would be made more for what? Finger picking.
The Taylor guitars are real popular in the finger picking artists. They have extreme clarity of tone, very shimmering, and very light action. They're very good for beginning players for that reason. We sell a lot of the lower end Taylors to beginning players because they're easy to play and they sound good. And they're almost always beautiful. Now, if you want to turn that over again, show the three-piece back.
Beautiful guitar.
We found a couple of different manufacturers have gone to a three-piece back on occasion, and it is a little bit more economical in some of the rarer woods, but it also changes the tone slightly. It seems to give you a little bit more bottom-end resonance when you compare this exact same guitar with a two-piece back.
Absolutely.
And Taylor offers both of them, and there's no difference in charge whether you want the three-piece or the two-piece, which is kind of nice of them.
Absolutely. Well, what else have you got over there, Jack?
Well, let's see. One thing we wanted to talk about, I did want to talk about with the small starter guitars, because we talked about these guitars are really good for people of extreme small stature, but you'll notice that they don't have a lot of output. They're kind of weak compared to the full-size classical guitar. A lot more body. And the other thing that people seem to forget is they'll pick up a guitar and they'll grab it like a baseball bat. And they'll go, oh, they grab the full-size guitar, my hand doesn't fit. But this is the wrong way to hold the guitar. You need to hold it like this. And I found with most of the younger players that come in to look for a first guitar that their hand actually is too big for this guitar. My hand actually is, well, for a guitar player, actually my hand's small. But by holding it properly. And the challenge when they want to choose the small guitar is that the child will probably outgrow it very quickly. And
Right.
then the money invested in the small guitar is gone. So I try to avoid the small guitars. Now this guitar here,
So unless you need a small guitar for travel purposes,
now this guitar specifically was designed to go backpacking. It's very light, very small, doesn't take up a lot of space, but boy, what a sound.
talk about what that's made out of.
I don't know what it's made
High
of.
pressure laminate. Okay, what it is it's a composite of wood chips. You know, basically the waste from making the higher end guitars, and some sort of elastomer, probably some plastic or resin of some sort, pressed together under very, very high pressure. And it actually sounds pretty darn good.
It sounds wonderful.
Works
I'm
well
amazed
as a
at this.
canoe paddle too, because it's kind of waterproof. You know,
Yes, exactly. So, and
Even that neck, by the way, is made out of
they're excellent
laminate.
for traveling because they do stand up to the weather well because they're not single pieces of wood glued together. So these are wonderful guitars, and they're relatively inexpensive as high-end guitars, which this is a Martin. It's a fairly high-end manufacturer.
Right. Okay, so size, what we're saying is that it doesn't have to be a small guitar for a small person, although if they're very small, a very young child, I would say 6 and under, and would prefer, we even have smaller ones than that 3/4 size when we have half-size guitars. Little kids tend to like their size. They tend to like things that fit within their little world, and so I think it's a very good idea, and they're very inexpensive, some of the very smaller guitars. So for a very young child, 6 and under, a half-size guitar would be good. We might go from 7 to 8 to 9 years old with a 3/4 size, and if Dad has his mind set on a travel guitar anyway, this might not be a bad thing.
Well,
Because this is a cool little guitar to take camping, and so this size, which is essentially a 3/4 size guitar, would be an excellent choice also. So size-wise, I think the obvious winner would be the Dreadnought, which is in those packages, both that pink one back there and that natural, and of course in that beautiful Martin that you have there. So that would be the size choice if it fits the person.
yes, it's the most popular and because it tends to have the best balance of tone,
Exactly.
treble to bass, really good resonance.
So that's another issue. Okay, now as we go along, I would also like to mention the fact that whatever you do on a guitar should be predicated on the long-term approach, okay, the long-term value aspect. proud to say this is US of A, and America is king when it comes to guitars. Basically, there's no such thing as a collectible guitar made in any other country. We have, the whole world cherishes our guitars, our Gibsons, our Martins, our Taylors, Guild, all of the American icons. Been around for well over 100 years. Martin since 1833, and Gibson since about 1903, I believe, and on and on. It might have been the 1890s for Gibson. I believe it was when Orville Gibson started. So the bottom line is that some of these guitars become very, very valuable family heirlooms as time goes on. This is a Gibson SJ200. They've been making this guitar since the 50s or so. One of these from the 50s would be worth about 10 or 15 times what the person paid for it then. It would be going today for about $4,000, which is more than this goes for brand new. So this guitar is you know, somewhere in that range new, but street price is less than that. A vintage model would go for probably in that $4,000 range. Well, a vintage Martin from the 50s or 60s could go way up, could go into the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 range, and easily get up there. And some of the ones that are from the 20s and 30s?
Well, easily you'll find collectors. This is a D41. If you added the abalone across the end of the neck here, and then on the back you'd have what is a D45, and pre-war Martin D45s go pretty close to $100,000 now. And this is a guitar that sold for $15, $20, maybe $25 in 1939, 1940, that era. So you can see that if you get a quality instrument, you're going to have something that can, and almost guaranteed appreciation. I know, Gary, you do a lot of real estate, and I know you've been switching a lot of your money into your guitars because they're going up faster than good real estate is, even here in this valley.
The 401k guitar. There's actually a column in Vintage Guitar magazine called the 401k guitar, and it tracks vintage guitars versus the S&P 500 and the Dow, and it's interesting. The guitars are winning, by the way. Different guitars do tend to go up in value. Now, you don't have to spend a fortune. Obviously, budget is always a consideration, especially around gift-giving time. There are some guitars. We brought just a number of different ones, and I'd like to show you this. This is a Seagull. This comes from Canada, actually, and uses a cedar top, which is kind of a loose wood that resonates very nicely. It's not a fancy-looking guitar. You'll notice it's not real fancy wood or shiny. I believe they use cherry wood for the back and sides, and some sort of hardwood for the neck. It might be maple. Not an expensive guitar. It's in the $300 range or so, but it is a solid top, and it does sound pretty good.
It's got a nice resonance to it. The cedar gives it a lot of warmth,
Not
which
a
is
bad
why
guitar.
it's a popular.
And then, Jack, you're holding a Guild, I believe. Now they make both American and imported guitars, as most of them do, by the way. The American Guilds are the more expensive ones and are the most sought after guitars. The imports, for the money, are not a bad choice. Let's hear that one just for a second. Not a bad guitar.
Now, this one, they did some really nice things. I don't know if we can get a close-up shot of the binding is actually wood binding. It's not plastic like some of the other lesser expensive. This is a moderately priced guitar. It's between $800, $1,000 is the price range on these guitars. They are made overseas, but the craftsmanship is excellent. If you are on a limited budget, but one of the good sounding guitars, these are excellent, as are the Seagulls. We also have an example of Fender's overseas line for acoustics here.
This is one of theirs.
And they named this as the California series, but it's still overseas. Also very bright guitar.
That one has a pickup built in.
Comes with electronics built in.
That's something we should talk about, because on almost every acoustic guitar now you have the option of having a pickup built in. And it's actually under the bridge. Can you point out where?
It usually sits up right under the saddle.
Okay.
And I like to recommend to my clients that they consider this. Most people come in and they're on their second or third guitar, and they'll say, well, I say, would you consider using electronics to amplify your guitar? And they say, oh, no, I don't play. And I say, well, you don't play in church? And I go, oh, yes. A lot of people will be playing in church for worship, and it's much easier to just plug the guitar in to the church sound system. You get a lot more presence to support the choir, as opposed to using a microphone like we're doing here today, because we're not fighting any background noises.
No background noise.
And to add it after the fact, which, well, I'll add it later, usually adds 50 to 100% to the price of the electronics coming from the guitar, and it never sounds as good.
It's much cheaper to just buy it that way. Now this guitar is kind of interesting because they call it the California series. Fender obviously started in California, down in Fullerton, my hometown, and they made a whole series of these called the Malibu, the Newporter, that sort of thing. And they used the headstock off their electric guitars, and that's the Stratocaster-shaped headstock up there where the tuning keys are. And that particular guitar, you see, it looks a lot like an electric, and they've tried to make the neck pretty narrow and have a nice flat action, a lot like an electric guitar.
And it plays well.
So that guitar, for someone who is used to an electric guitar, probably is going to like that sort of a thing. But if you're used to a more traditional acoustic guitar, well then probably some of the other more traditional styles will appeal to you. So there's another one that you can do. Now,
just before we, because I'm holding this one, you also notice that it does have the cutaway here for reach. So if you want to do that kind of fancy stuff, it's nice to have. Some of the purists say that it does affect the tone. You're losing about this much of the body, that much of the surface. To be honest with you, I can grab 100 people on the street, turn them around, say which one is louder, and they're going to go, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I don't worry about that. It's nice to be able to get up here. Although most of the time I'm down here.
Those are called the cowboy frets down there. Now, let's talk about real quick here. We have about 5 minutes to go, Jack. So a lot of material here. The action on a guitar is the distance that the strings are off the neck. In other words, how hard I have to press to get the strings to fret so if I hold the guitar just right, we'll see that the distance here that you have to press the string is called the action of the guitar. Now, it stands to reason that the shorter that distance, the easier it is to push and to get a nice sound. The problem is, on an acoustic guitar, when we get too close to the frets, they tend to buzz, make that kind of sound. He's simulating that by getting between the frets. Now, the other thing that we have is the intonation. On the bridge of the guitar, down here, where the strings come across what we call the saddle here, if we can get in close on that, there's a spot here where the actual strings touch. They just come over the top here. And that is very critical to the sound of the guitar. So placement of the bridge is important. Placement of that saddle is very, very important. And how it's angled is important. Those are all things that have to be checked and set up with a good guitar, and even on a less expensive guitar. That's the kind of thing we do at Showcase. The other thing is most steel string guitars have truss rods. There is a metal rod running the length of the neck, and right under this little plate up here is a screw or a bolt that you can adjust, and it actually will counteract the pressure. The strings are pulling the neck this way, the truss rod pulls it back this way. And that's critical to the long-term life of the guitar. Not all guitars have them. In the old days, a lot of guitars didn't. It's a good thing to have in a guitar, particularly in one that you're going to use and
play for 100 or 50 years. Or
exactly. So. And that's one of the reasons why I think a steel string guitar is a good value too, because they are adjustable. The nylon strings don't have that kind of pressure from the steel strings.
They're about half.
Yes, so they don't have to have a truss rod. So they don't have to have that adjustment, and they generally don't. You know, so, but when they do go out, that's it. there's no fixing it, short of doing a neck reset. A neck reset is when they take the neck off, physically off the guitar, put it at a better angle, and then glue it back on again. And on a cheaper guitar, that isn't worth it. on a guitar like this or that Martin, then it certainly is worthwhile doing, because it's about a $500, $600 process, and
on a $300 guitar.
On a $300 guitar, it just wouldn't make any sense. Yeah. So, well, have you got anything to add before we go? Because we're just about out of time.
Well, it's the one key thing about choosing an instrument, and I say this over and over again, it's not the wood, it's not the name brand, it's not where it was built, it's the sound. And I always recommend to people, if you're going to be choosing an instrument, you have to hear it. At the very least, ideally you'll play it because the way it fits to your body
absolutely
is very critical. You can't buy a guitar from a picture and hope to get the right guitar.
Absolutely. You have to play it against its peers also.
Right. So if you have a budget of $200 to $300, play all the $200 and $300 guitars.
We're about out of time.
Well, let's play a little bit.